So welcome to our breakfast briefing. We're going to be talking, as Lindsay said, about the evolving role of the PMO and the training that's available. My name's Eileen Roden, and I, along with Lindsay, run PMO Learning. I've been in and around PMOs probably all of my working life, though really initially from the project and programme management side. I ended up working in a PMO almost by accident, and then thought I'd died and gone to heaven, and can't understand why the whole world doesn't want to work in a PMO. Reasonably Catholic in my views around various project and programme methodologies, really about providing the right guidance for that organisation. So that's my background. Before we start, what I'd like you to do in your groups and in your tables, again, just to kind of help the networking and to kind of find out about what other PMOs do, I'd like you to try and find something that everybody does on your table within your PMO. So something that every single kind of PMO does. And I'm quite happy to put my money down on one thing that will definitely come out, or I say definitely will come out, as I said, I put some money on that will come out from at least one of the tables. And then secondly, which I think is always the kind of the more interesting one, what I'd like you to do is I would like you to find something that only one of you does. So you'll find things on there that kind of two of you do, or all of you do, as we've mentioned from the first bullet point there. But I want you to find something absolutely unique that just one person on your table does, and then we'll kind of share that. So I'm going to give you about kind of 10 minutes to have those discussions, and then we'll kind of reconvene. Okay? What do you all have in common? We'll start at the table on the left. What do you all do?
Stakeholder management.
Okay. So, stakeholders, did he discuss what kind of stakeholders?
No, we didn't get that far.
But I'm quite impressed, actually. So it's interesting that you talk about stakeholder management, because it's not often seen to be something that there's a conscious effort to do. So we all kind of interact with our stakeholders, but stakeholder management and stakeholder engagement is a specific activity. Come on in and join us. Excellent. Right, so what do you all do?
Reporting and dashboarding.
And that would have been, that's where my money would have been. Yes, in terms of, I've yet to meet a PMO that doesn't do any kind of reporting. Interestingly, do you report on the projects and programmes, or do you report on yourselves? Report on ourselves? Oh, fancy doing that. Yes? I'm assuming you're talking projects and programmes? A bit of both. So there's a bit of kind of self-reporting.
I have to report to my boss.
Okay. So it's quite interesting. We've done a couple of sessions on actually setting some PMO targets and where we should be focusing on, and actually reporting on our progress. So just another question then on the reporting piece. How many, so I mentioned in my introduction that as PMO people, we deliver projects because we roll out new processes. How many of those projects follow the same delivery framework, or sit within the same delivery framework we expect from all of our project and programme managers? There was a bit of a silence in the room there. Oh, you've got one. Go on, Richard.
Yeah, I've done two. So,
okay.
yeah, none of us were, by telling you. We ran a conversion from an analog world to a toolset world. We ran that strictly as a project following our own life cycle. Excellent.
Do you know the good thing about doing that is when somebody says, have you got an example of a risk register? You can say, look, here's the one I used on my project. Yes? And I go into lots of organisations and we talk about improving project and programme management capability, and they're introducing project management, and I say, can I just see your project plan? And they go, what do you mean? So, well, you're about to tell everybody else in your organisation that if we're delivering change, we need to have some process and some kind of governance and control. Are we above that? We haven't got time for that. Sorry, if you haven't got time to do it, what on earth are the rest of the world? Why everybody's just sitting there twiddling their thumbs? So it's a really good way of kind of being this exemplar and actually demonstrating that we follow our own, we take our own medicine as well. And it's actually good for us to kind of keep our hand in and recognise the challenges of delivering projects and programs in our own organisation, because we end up hitting all of the same roadblocks as everybody else does, you know, not getting somebody to approve things on time, not managing to get people to kind of do the pilot and the testing, all of those things. Okay, last table, what do you all do?
We were boring, we were reporting as well.
That's not boring.
Governance.
Reporting and governance. And what do you mean by the governance piece?
We're talking about the health check of the project.
Okay, so some kind of assurance role as well in terms of health checks. And we'll kind of come on to that. Well, one of the things we talk about on one of our course is about whether our focus when we roll out new processes and procedures is driving for compliance or whether we're actually driving for commitment. Because if we get commitment, we can walk away, and because people believe in what they have to do, they keep on doing it. Whereas if we drive for compliance, we have to keep being there with our policeman's truncheon to make sure we kind of keep batting over the head in it. I always find it kind of quite interesting in terms of how much effort we spend trying to manage compliance, where if we'd allocated some of that effort up front to going for commitment, then actually we might have saved ourselves some bother. But I'm not going to question you all on your policeman-like activities. We did an in-house course for an organisation, and we had a number of people on the course. And one of the things we do on the course is we draw a picture of how we think our PMO is perceived by the rest of the organisation. And so all of the delegates draw the picture. And one of the pictures was literally a policeman with a truncheon. And the line manager came down that evening and almost wept, because he said he spent all of his time trying not to be the policeman, but it was still obviously a perception of his PMO. So it's an interesting exercise to do in-house, just to see how people perceive you as a persona. So that's two kind of ones that everything we do. So this is the interesting bit, like, so the uniqueness. I suspect you've all had some really interesting kind of conversations trying to find some unique things that you do. So I'll give this table the opportunity. So what unique thing did you identify that only one person did on your table?
We found something that one of us don't do rather than...
Okay.
So everyone on this table deals with budgets and finance today.
Okay.
But Samara and I work together, and we have nothing to do with budget or finance. We have a separate commercial team.
Okay. So so this is you have to excuse me, because I still love this subject. So I still feel as I'm just curious and asking. So do your project managers have budgetary control over their project?
Not really.
Okay.
We have a commercial team that do everything to do with budget.
Do you deliver internal projects or external projects for customers? Okay, so that explains some of that. What about your internal projects?
We are only just looking at setting up an internal PMO. That's very new for us. We don't have one at the moment.
Okay. And again, that's fascinating. A couple of years ago, I was one of the judges for some prestigious project management awards. And we had one of the categories was Consultancy Company of the Year. So we'd done the shortlist, and we got the 3 companies in to do their final presentation. And in they came, and they did some really spectacular things about how wonderful things they did for their customers. And I just asked a question. I said, so do you use the same methodology internally for your internal projects? And there was this poor director was desperately trying to work out how to say no without saying no. And it goes back to that saying, the cobbler's children have no shoes. You know, it's interesting the things that we do to other people, but actually don't recognise that actually the value internally to our own organisations. So it's one of the questions when I work with commercial organisations that I tend to ask, because it gives me an understanding of kind of where the organisation is in terms of their view of a PMO. Yes. Evolving role of the PMO. And I'm just going to go through a diagram which has surfaced in all of the kind of the management best practice, so the Prince 2 and the P3O book, which I did, and the management of portfolios. This kind of concept that actually in an organisation there are essentially kind of 2 elements to that: a run the business and a change the business. And that when we change the business, we put new ways of working and products into our organisation, and as we run the business, we identify requirements for change and kind of new strategies. And this kind of ecosystem has to work and be evenly balanced. And I'd kind of seen this and I'd kind of mentally kind of said, yeah, that's fine and it's okay. And it took me a bit of reflection after kind of going through this with some conversations with the delegates about the real reality of this. You don't have to go back very many years where there were a number of organisations, large institutions, who actually just did this. You know, the vast majority of their work was just running their business. They made the same old products, they sold them to the same old customers, and life continued to be profitable. And there are very few organisations that can afford to be in that position anymore. Yes, the world is changing. Do people understand the term VUCA? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous is the new kind of phrase in terms of the environment that we deliver our projects in. And so organisations now have no choice. Yes, if all they do is run the business, they will die. Yes, there is no, and it's always, I mean, some of us were shocked when Woolworths died, right? But some of the big stores, and my favourite, John Lewis, yes, is still continuing to struggle. You would think a big, huge established organisation, great credibility, the most beautiful stores. I have no shares, I'm not selling them. It's just my favourite shop. But they're really starting to have a look at how they too have to change. They are not immune to having to deliver change and how they interact with their customers and how they do their day-to-day business. And this has started, I believe, the real kind of recognition that there is almost no company in any part of any sector now who can it do with some kind of PMO. Now, I'm quite happy that some PMOs and some of the people who we come on are setting the PMO course up are personal assistants to chief executives. Yes, small, very small organisations, or even small to medium organisations, who they just recognised, we've just got lots of stuff going on. Can you set up a PMO without actually knowing what a PMO is, what needs to be done, kind of what are those steps are involved? And what they really know is I just want to be able to see these pictures, because the vast majority of organisations, their governance, their processes, their systems are all geared to running the business. Yes, when you start as a new starter, you go in and the payroll system hopefully kicks in, your performance appraisal, your job description, and it's all about doing the business as usual. And it's a conscious step by the organisations to say, actually, we need to start getting our head round doing this kind of change the business. And so we have this balance between running the business and change the business. And I don't necessarily mean balance in terms of it's 50-50, because I know that's what the picture looks like. That's never really the case. It will flex depending on what kind of organisation you are. But I think at one point the change the business for a lot of organisations was so small, it was almost, we could pretend it wasn't there. I don't believe there's any business which has that kind of situation at the minute, which leads us to kind of loads of opportunities and about recognising about what we do as a PMO and how we can support the business. And again, it will always vary from organisation to organisation. Yes? Would you like a copy of the slides?
Yeah, sure.
So there you go, Lindsay will make sure that happens after the event. No, that's fine. So this whole kind of concept of a PMO is much more recognisable now, and people actually have heard the term, even though the last breakfast briefing we did, we talked about what the P stands for and all of the interesting names we have. So I think that kind of has underpinned really not just the rise of projects, but also the rise of PMOs. The second thing, which I think we've now got to in a number of organisations, and again, conscious of the lady who was on our course last week, I recognise it's not there universally across all of the PMOs, is this move from having generic support. What do you do in the PMO? Well, we just support projects and programmes. What does that mean? Well, anything we want it to mean. To actually starting to think about having a defined list of services. Okay, so the picture I've got here is for somebody who's a better mother than me. You know, the kids come home and say, can I have something to eat? You toddle off in the kitchen, you kind of use whatever skills, read whatever recipe book needs, and kind of cook whatever's required at usually whatever time of the day or night it is that your kids are hungry and you want to kind of feed them. Oh, fathers, sorry, I forget. I do it from my perspective, yes? So, whereas if you go out to into a restaurant, what do you get in front of you? A menu, yes? So one who always goes a little bit off menu, but what does having a menu mean for the actual restaurant? What do they do in terms of? So they can do some planning. What do you mean by organisation?
Timing, well, still planned.
Well, yeah, well, we have opening hours for a start, don't we? Yes, so we can talk about kind of what our opening hours are going to be.
And they are able to kind of curtail the demand of the
ingredients?
not ingredients, but the requests. You know,
Okay.
If you come into the
Yes, so
restaurant and they have a menu, you can go beyond the menu.
okay, so yes, so we know the list of things that we're going to be asked for, and the kind of the follow-on from that is actually it means that we can have a much more limited larder in terms of what we purchase, and we recognise that we can go with the seasonality when things are available, which allows us then to manage the costs of some of the things that we're selling. And knowing our market about what people are prepared to pay, you know, there are certain parts in England where, you know, going out for a £250 meal, yes, probably not a thing in the centre of London. You can probably find a number of places where that happens. So knowing your market and what people are prepared to pay. Now, if anybody's watched MasterChef or any of those programmes, you will also know that in the kitchen what they do is they allocate chefs out. So today you are in charge of beans on toast, and today you're in charge of salmon and scrambled eggs. So they allocate out particular meals to individual kind of chefs who then either develop their skills or actually use the skills that they've got to best effect in the kitchen. And so we can take that same analogy to the PMO, is that we're starting to see much more service-driven PMOs where we have a list of services, so we can make sure that we have the tools and the processes and the templates in place to support those services, but also that we can identify the skills required and make sure we have them available to deliver the services from our PMO. And it's an interesting kind of conversation when you start getting asked to do things in your PMO and you have to say, well, actually, we haven't got any kind of spare resource, so which of these services would you like us to stop doing to replace them with these other services? It's not just continually adding. So I think this has been a real kind of shift in thinking from PMOs and how they service their customers. I think it's also worth saying that to get to this position and to be able to kind of offer services requires what the kind of the table on the left talked about, is actually doing some stakeholder engagement to understand what the services are that are out there, but also a level of credibility within your organisation that they kind of trust you to deliver services. And actually, it's an interesting play in terms of who gets to the final decision on which services are actually provided. We'll kind of talk a bit about that in our next slide. And it really is, it's been interesting to kind of see how what PMOs have been allowed to do, which is always an interesting phrase, isn't it? What we've been allowed to do in the organisation. One of the challenges we sometimes find is people who work in PMOs. I've yet to find somebody who works in a PMO who's really not passionate about what they do. We tend to be a kind of a passionate type of people in the PMO, which is why we're there. And there's lots of times you go in organisations and are desperate to do lots of things that you've kind of done in previous organisations and can see that the organisation needs. But we're limited not by our imagination, but by their imagination and their trust and their kind of view about what we're capable of. And so we should never underestimate the amount of work it takes to actually do that stakeholder engagement to get us into a position where we can have a conversation with the people who are actually going to use our services And some people actually don't even recognise that they can be a customer of the PMO because they assume it's just project and program managers. But actually we've got the opportunity to help the organisation on a much wider scale. So rise of projects supported by the rise of the PMO, and this move away from kind of just generic support to actually having some kind of menu-driven, service-driven service into the organisation. So it's just, I'll go back to kind of where, I'm going to say where PMOs came from, and it's been really fascinating as I've kind of reflected on this a number of times. It is a story of kind of where PMOs have come from and are potentially moving to. But what's fascinating is even in today's world, there are organisations that are still kind of moving through this journey. So when we say evolving, there's evolving across the industry in total, but actually it's worth thinking about kind of where you are in your organisation and how we can kind of, if we want to, progress through the journey. So going back to kind of the good old what people, and it still alarms me that when we say PMO, people think support equals admin. Yes, and so organising meetings, taking minutes, chasing actions, that's still in the support. This is not really service driven at all. This is the good old honest to goodness support. And when the first P3O manual came out, and Sue Vowler, who wrote the first version, first edition, she refused to have the word support anywhere in the P3O manual. Anybody who read the first version, it was evangelical about we don't do support, we don't do admin. And kind of when I kind of did the second version, I kind of softened that a bit because I kind of think there is still a place to do admin in PMOs, yes? It may not be the most value adding in our minds because we want to do all of the nice sexy stuff, but actually this stuff still needs doing. So there are still PMOs who add a valuable service, and I've been there looking after stationary cupboards. I've been in charge of conference room bookings in my PMO because actually it's a good central body, and the trick is for us not to be limited by that and people for us to be seen as that's all we're capable of. Now there are some challenges in that because often, and I've already mentioned it, a lot of the people kind of come into the PMO with good organisational skills. And it's really being able to kind of demonstrate that actually their credibility in being able to offer other services. And as a PMO manager, it's important that we don't continue to tag people with that and limit their opportunities. So the support admin, I think, is still a valuable role, but it needs to sit within the bigger picture rather than be seen to be the only thing that we do. So our next step is really about project and program support. Okay, and the next level was being where actually the kind of the admin start to develop into, well, actually we know a bit about projects and programs, but we're still really at the project and program managers kind of beck and call, and we often see this in a dedicated project office or a dedicated program office where we're there to things like kind of maintain the various registers, we're there to collect the project reporting, but we're almost doing that as a kind of a conduit rather than value add. So at this point, we do need to have project and program management knowledge, but we're potentially not necessarily seen by the organisation in experts in any way in project and program management, and we might know about project and program management, but the perception is actually we couldn't actually deliver a project of our own. Yes, when we're doing this kind of support. And again, a hugely valuable role where we can learn. And a lot of people actually come into PMO to actually do this role because they want to move on and actually become a project or program manager. It is still, and I've stopped getting upset. I couldn't understand why people would come into the PMO and leave. Why on myth, would you want to leave a PMO? Yes, but apparently some people do. Some people want to grow up and become project and program managers, and there's still a valuable kind of learning ground, because I always think if you're working on a project, you get to see that project. If you work in a PMO, you're much more likely to see a number of projects and therefore get lots of experience about how different project managers work, about the relative importance of the various artifacts we have around projects. And once we get past that, the next level is project and program guidance. So this is where we start being the centre of excellence, where they start recognising, actually, it's not just about the PMO helping them do their job in terms of kind of doing things for them. Actually, we start asking them to do things. We are seen to be the leaders and the thought leaders around project and program management. We start setting the standards that they have to follow. That's a very kind of, shoe is on a very different foot when we get into this space. Yes, and often this is the time when we start introducing again some systems and picking up on something that was brought up on this table, where we start doing assurance. Where, and again, one of the things that's often misunderstood about assurance, if you do project and program assurance, you have no authority to make any changes to that project or program. Yes, it is about raising the flag. And again, if you're doing this role and you're doing this role well, you have the opportunity to kind of speak to the senior management team, the program boards and the project boards to raise the flag and say, actually, there's things that are happening in and around your project that should raise concern, and really kind of start using some of your broader knowledge to give some insights that that it's very difficult for the project boards and the program boards to see. So there's a real kind of step up, I think, from actually kind of doing support to what I've called guidance. You're never going to see, can we have a project and program management guide in your PMO? But actually you can start seeing some of the services that you would provide. You're starting to drive project and program management in the organisation. And it's often when you get to here, you start looking at project management maturity. Yes, and start saying, actually, it becomes part of your targets, part of your role as a PMO, to take accountability for driving up the project and program delivery capability of your organisation. What I've found fascinating is that the number of organisations who can do projects but can't actually do programs. Yes, there is still, I think, there are very few organisations who've really sussed out program management. And if you're a program manager, there's lots of work out there for somebody. Organisations really struggle. And again, fascinating in terms of whether organisations can justify employing full-time a program manager, or whether you get one in for those large strategic programs. So it's an interesting conversation we have. And establishing those program officers is quite different from actually establishing a project office. And one of the things we often talk about projects and programs as a collective, but actually there's quite a big step change between the project and a program. Setting up a program office has a much more involved in doing that. And then this is a space that actually we're seeing a lot more organisations now starting to recognise. And I've called this portfolio support for a number of reasons. Well, let's go through some of the things that we do. When we start talking about portfolio support, we're starting to have conversations about which projects and programmes we actually do and why we're doing them. So we're much better. It's really came about, when we did individual programs, it's really getting that portfolio view where we start asking questions about why we're doing this. Actually, can we do some prioritization because we haven't got enough time or money or resource to do all of the projects? So it's often a conversation. We don't get to decide, but we get to facilitate those conversations. Yes, and very often that allows us, for the first time, I believe, to start looking at benefits realisation. Yes. So in the past, when we're doing projects and programs, we'll have all kind of sat there through the business case. We'll have all kind of sniggered at what's in the benefits, knowing that there's no hope of actually delivering what's in there. But you know, it's got us past the hurdle. We'll get the project signed off and then we can forget about them. But it's entertaining for the day we get the business case signed off. Once we're starting to play at portfolio level, actually there tends to be a lot more focus on the benefits realisation piece, where we're having to start to say, you know, kind of we're really focusing on that because it's a big input to the prioritisation. But it also has further implications when we're starting to do the portfolio support, is that it means that our project management processes and the services we provide continue after the project's finished. There's an awful lot of PMOs who still have a project management process, who still only have processes up until the end of project close. And even though the project delivery framework, the project delivery method has do a business case, identify the benefits, yes, we get to the end of the project, right, then we stop all project reporting because there's no project manager. Who could possibly report after the project manager's gone? The sponsor, yes. But we very rarely there's a lot of organisations who actually don't get onto that getting the sponsors to do reporting on benefits and actually keeping it on their register, those projects that continue after the project has closed down. One of the other things that really get missed off when we do this kind of portfolio support as well is any interaction with the business. So going back to the table on the left-hand side, and I started asking about which stakeholders do you play with. An awful lot of PMOs, their interaction very rarely goes beyond the project and programme managers and the project and programme team in their organisation. There are lots of PMOs who actually don't take the opportunity to engage with project sponsors. Yeah, so part of equipping the organisation and upskilling the capability or upskilling the organisation is to make sure that it's not just the project managers who know what they're doing, but also the sponsors who know what they're doing. And the sponsors have that level of support and assurance of their activities, as well as from a project delivery perspective. And if we're starting to play portfolio management and we're doing the realisation of benefits, that doesn't happen in the change the business part. That happens in the run the business part. So it's really when we start getting into this kind of portfolio support, our whole kind of stakeholder shift moves out into the business as usual world, because they want to know that the changes, all of the things that we're going to throw at the business are actually going to be done in a controlled manner. That, you know, kind of on the 20th of December, we're not going to have 26 new processes applied, and then by the 1st of January, we're all going to kind of walk away and assume everything's up and running. So again, actually kind of working with the business allows us to do better assurance of project requirements and the projects that are coming through, but actually allows us to do real monitoring and assurance of the benefits realisation piece. We did a lunch a number of years, about I can't remember now, it was 3 or 4 years ago, and we actually did wrote up a paper, which is also available off our website, called Moving from Portfolio Reporting to Portfolio Management, because a lot of us think we do portfolio management because we produce a report across all of the projects. It's reporting. Yes, portfolio management is really the next step after that, which is really this kind of what I would call portfolio guidance, where we don't define the strategy, but actually we can facilitate the strategy development with the organisation. We can start talking about alignment of project and programmes to that strategy and start looking at, and it's an interesting step about challenging the strategy. Yes, if this is the benefits we're getting and we're not getting from the projects and programs, really are we going to achieve the strategy, and actually should that strategy change? Some of the conversations we've been having in developing the competency framework is really kind of how much involvement do PMOs have in supporting portfolio management and doing portfolio management. I know at the next breakfast briefing we're going to do that in a little bit more detail. Part of my history in work, I was an HR manager for a while. I was probably the most un-PC HR manager, but we'll let that pass. I'm still a member of CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development. And I remember kind of 10, 15 years ago, actually be more than that now, it'd be nearer 20, I'm very old, it'll be nearer kind of 20 odd years ago now. And we were having conversations at the time about why HR was not in the boardroom, you know, and kind of really kind of HR is an important part of the organisation. It really kind of unlocks the key to how we make the best of our kind of human resources across the organisation. And now it's kind of nobody thinks twice about having an HR director sitting on the board. And interestingly, from the CIPD now, some of the articles that are, why does the HR director never make it to chief executive? Yeah, so that's kind of the story. And I'm just thinking about where we are with the PMOs now, because actually there's an awful lot of organisations who are starting to recognise that somebody who has oversight of change the business and how that works and how that interplays with the run the business actually is critical to organisation success going forward. And there is definitely an increased number of PMO director jobs starting to say, well, actually, we need somebody to almost run that change the business part of the organisation as an operational unit, to say, actually, we've got projects and programmes happening all the time, we've got new methodologies coming in, and actually what becomes really important then is not necessarily about how you do projects and programmes, but how you interact back with the business. Because the picture sometimes can be very misleading because it assumes we've almost got kind of two completely different organisations. And there are very few organisations who split their organisation in half and say, right, you guys over here, you're running the business, and you guys over here are delivering projects. Very often they're intertwined. Yeah? So you've got people who sit in an operational job who spend some of their time doing business as usual and some of their time either managing a project or delivering projects. So we've got quite a kind of complex relationship then from just a resourcing perspective, but also in terms of that kind of delivery perspective. So the roles in the PMO now are actually kind of continuing almost to kind of multiply, and you can kind of come in with no project or program management experience, either through the kind of the support or actually doing the project and program support role and actually kind of learning your trade and learning your craft. If you've got project and program management experience, and I think, you know, we talked before about people used to kind of come into the PMO to kind of grow up and become a project manager. And actually what we're seeing now is a lot of project and program managers actually coming into the PMO to actually kind of run those kind of PMOs. And I think it's quite a challenge to come that way, because it's very different trying to do something that suits lots of projects rather than just doing your own. And there's a slightly different kind of focus and flexibility. And my favourite kind of characteristic of any PMO person is pragmatism. You know, just kind of let's do something that works, conscious of when we're not following the defined process, but knowing it's kind of it's allowable because it will get us to where we need to be without causing an awful lot of residual damage. One of the greatest areas, and I think some of the biggest changes we're seeing now, is there are people who are coming into PMO director roles who've never actually delivered projects and programs. They've been around in the organisation, they know how the business works, they know how disruptive changes can be. They know the strategy, they know the industry the organisation is working in, and therefore they are the ideal people to facilitate that strategy development. So we're actually, you know, what used to be a kind of a completely admin function and grow into being a project and program manager, we're starting to see that reversed. But actually at the very kind of top end, we're now starting to see people who are actually kind of coming into the PMO who've really kind of not come through the project and program management route. And we always get, sometimes I think sponsors get a real kind of a hard time because they're not necessarily effective. or they're not as effective as we would want them to be. But if you think about some of the career paths some of them have taken, at what point have they ever been on any project or program management course? Yes, and they're often sitting there in quite senior levels of the organisation. We appoint them to be a sponsor, and it's quite difficult when you're sitting there as a senior position in the organisation. Excuse me, I don't know how to do my job. Yes, it's not the kind of thing you want to put your hand up and do. So actually kind of that sponsor role really needs much more support sometimes than the project and program managers. But actually those kind of people who've actually kind of starting to get an understanding of the sponsorship piece rather than the delivery piece are actually really good people to come in and actually run those kind of PMO director roles and actually work with the board. Which is I think, is an interesting challenge. Right? One of the things we've always said when we started kind of playing around PMOs was this kind of, you can have a career in PMO. Yes, and I'm not just being in the PMO to go and be a project manager. And it's now an interesting challenge about actually, if you stay in the PMO, about whether you've got what it takes to actually do one of the top jobs. Because whether you've got the business experience and the knowledge of the industry in order to be able to do that. And you definitely can't do that if you've not really done the true wider portfolio piece and actually have got stakeholders out in the business and actually learn how the change impacts the business. So this bit here, bit's not going to work, this bit here in terms of kind of doing the kind of the portfolio support is really a prerequisite, I would suggest, in order to be able to be that kind of PMO director. If all you've done is projects and programs and not understood how the business works, it's a real difficult step up. And I think it's a broader skill and knowledge that previously we've not necessarily anticipated in PMO roles, but becoming an absolute kind of prerequisite now for moving on. So conscious of the time, I do want to just go on.
Regarding the project prioritization,
Yes.
apart from the resources and the money,
Yes.
resources in terms of human and capital, yeah, what else do you take into board while prioritizing projects? So
when we did the P3O book, we wanted some examples, and the problem is that if you get specific examples, then actually it belies a lot of the strategies of the organisation about what they find important. But a couple of things that I can kind of, from various clients that I've worked with, there's one client I really love, and they have a probability of success. So the project manager and the project sponsor say, what's the likelihood of this project being successful? Which sounds a bit silly. But what they've identified, there's a lot of projects that come down from head office that nobody really has any fire in their belly to deliver. And actually that gets really a low score because, you know, the will of the project manager and the project sponsor to get things through is a real contributor to project success. So they say we'd much rather put our money behind projects that people are going to fight for and get delivered than things that are not. Yeah, there is a certain German supermarket I work for, and they you get extra brownie points if what you're delivering goes across the whole estate, because it's all about consistency and repeatability. So you get in fact you get negative marks if you're doing something that's just for one store or for one region. Yes, because you're already then making it out of kilter. So the types of things that you put in that prioritization matrix are very much down to your individual organisation. And also in terms of how much you segment your portfolio. Yes, because, you know, there's certain people who say, well, actually, we want 80% of our projects to have a low risk because we need them to succeed. But then actually we're going to have 20% of our projects where we're going to have a much higher risk rating, and therefore risk has to go into that kind of prioritization matrix.
The environment as well, the transformation happening in all of this.
Absolutely, yes. So in terms of kind of the level of change required and the scope of the project, also can get taken into consideration as well. Yeah. So, some new acronyms. So these are really kind of emerging roles now in the PMO. Anybody know what any of those acronyms stand for?
Yeah.
AI?
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Robotic process automation.
Yes, that's the RPA. Machine learning. Yes, machine learning. Anybody know PA? Predictive analytics. Yes, so well done. Yes. So now, interesting, not everybody got all of those. So this is a fascinating development that's happening in the world at the minute. So we say emerging, yes, but let's not pretend it's something that's going to happen, because it's already happening now in a number of organisations. It's not widespread, but it's definitely going to be kind of where the world goes. So the first bit is robotic process automation. Anybody know what that is? Anybody want to give a one-line description? Amazon?
The way Amazon works at the moment is they have like robotics that pick a lot of the shopping.
Okay.
So they've automated our orders to make shopping easy, to make us receive our shopping quite quickly and easier.
So when we talk about a robotic process automation in a PMO perspective, how many people collate information from different systems and emails to do their portfolio reporting? Yes, robotic process automation says actually we can get a bot to do that for us. Yes, so it automatically goes and reads your emails, populates PowerPoint, and actually emails it out to whoever you want to receive that. Yes, so it's kind of very kind of high level kind of programming, for want of a better word, but it allows you to integrate systems that you have in your organization, even if you don't have a PPM tool. So it works with things like PowerPoints and websites, and actually kind of reduces all of what we would call the grunt work. Yes, that we've all said we do reporting. Yes, so there's lots of things around robotic process automation that can take all of the heavy lifting, which leaves us to do the insights and analysis bit that really kind of support the organization. And that is happening, and it's really interesting. I keep saying really, I love my subject. Really interesting in terms of how much that will reduce some of the more administrative tasks we do in the PMO. Yeah? So if all we do is administrative tasks, yes, that is a really kind of a red flag for us. The machine learning and artificial intelligence are they're toys really at the minute, but are used to fabulous effect to do this thing called predictive analytics. So let me give you an example of something that is now possible and is happening. You're working on a construction project, yes, and the project manager at the end of the month has to do a progress report, yes. So off they go, they kind of go and take a look around the site, they talk with all of the people, and they kind of fill out their report, and off they kind of send it. Don't need to do that. You send up a drone, takes a picture of everything that can be done, can tell you the exact number of bricks that's been laid, exact number of materials that are around on the site, automatically update MSP based on last week's weather, next month's weather. The tone of the report that's been produced can then give you a prediction of when it thinks the project is going to be finished. Right? That's happening now, right? Without any project manager kind of putting any pen to paper, and the project manager then has to be able to do the dialogue that sits alongside that. So interesting when you're going about your videos, your video reporting, effectively the PowerPoint presentation will be automatically generated, and the project manager then just has to do the dialogue that sits alongside that. Okay. Now that may sound kind of quite science fiction, but as I said, that's actually happening. The ability to process the big data, the ability for the artificial intelligence to be able to look at that and extract trends that we just can't see with the human eye, yes, is actually paying huge dividends on an awful lot of projects. And one of the things that we do is we sponsor something called the Project Hack, which is run by a guy called Martin Paver in London. It's on the 12th and 13th of October. And actually what's fascinating is project people like us who go kind of completely starry-eyed with all of this wonderful stuff mixed with real geeks, right, who do the data stuff. That's not our job, yes? So they play with the big data and can do all of the analysis, but it's the combination of those roles in terms of they can kind of do all the data and say, what kind of thing do you want to see? Oh, does this trend mean anything? And it's that combination of skills between the project and program management activity plus the kind of the people who can use the techie skills to do the data actually come together to produce something that's really usable. And it's amazing what you can do even in 2 days. So the last time we were there, it was Lindsay's been to a couple, it was the first one I did, and we did the weekend within 2 days. So, and I say 2 days, that's like 10 till 4, Saturday and Sunday. We created, using all of the bits and pieces from nothing, because I'd never seen any of them before, we created something that was a handheld app that project managers would write their report in, and actually the machine would say whether it was good, bad or indifferent and whether they needed to update it. So actually we improved the quality of the project reports at source. Yes? And it wasn't just kind of checking the grammar, it was actually kind of getting some real meaningful stuff out. And then that would kind of then go into the system and flag a whole load of things. Amazing what you can do in a short space of time. So it's called The Art of the Possible. Yes? And it's a great weekend and it's free. It might be £25, 10 or £25, but you can eat that for breakfast on the first day, let me tell you. Yes, it's a really good weekend, but these things are really kind of coming out there and they're going to be done much more frequently than, and it's something, and what happened with Agile, when Agile came out, the PMO was the place where people said, what should we be doing about Agile? Yes, should we be incorporating it? Should we kind of move to an Agile piece? And these are the kind of questions that are going to be coming out to PMOs going forward in order that we can continue to support project and program delivery within our organisation. So this is the good stuff and the fun stuff that's coming ahead. So that's just kind of where we've been. I think where our organisations are currently experiencing in terms of kind of whether we're there, it's still at project and programme support, or whether we've been lifted to the guidance. The real kind of interesting stuff is how we're really getting to guidance around portfolio management. And this kind of the techie stuff, as I would call it, is really where there's going to be a huge kind of explosion in PMOs in the next kind of 3 to 5 years. So it's worth getting in there. Now I've got some really interesting slides around all of our training. So I'm not going to go through them, Lindsay will shoot me, but yes. So there is some things there, you've got things on your desk which tell us about the standard certification courses. Yes, around the various levels. So we've got the BCS certifications, we've got the Axelos certifications in terms of P3O, and we've got the AI PMO certifications. So these are certifications that are set by PMO bodies that give us a broad range of PMO skills and capabilities. Okay, and they've all got their kind of additional merits, and you've got leaflets about all of them, and we're happy to talk about them in a little bit more detail. You will get this kind of presentation. They are available for mixing and matching, so you don't need to just kind of stick to one. There are various routes through that, but this is where I think the real kind of interest is going to be, is that now there's such a broader range of skills that we need from a PMO perspective, other than the kind of the standard certification stuff, which is where, from a PMO learning perspective, we're now starting to put our time and effort. So recognising kind of lots of organisations and lots of PMOs are still struggling with kind of what on earth should we be doing with Agile, our Lean Agile PMO and our Agile framework. So the Lean Agile PMO says, you know, how does the PMO change when we're kind of looking after Agile projects? And the Agile framework basically says there's a whole load of different ones out there. Which ones, what do each of those do, and what kind of what's different? We've done a course which has gone down really well actually about coaching skills. So this is not about being a coach. This is about using the skills of a coach to be able to do your job better as a PMO person. So that's working with your team, working with project managers, working with sponsors and working with the senior execs, all relevant in terms of coaching skills. The benefits management we've talked about. Once we start getting into the portfolio management area, then actually benefits has to come on the table for a conversation. So we've got a 1-day course where we cover off the full end-to-end benefits management life cycle and what our role is from a PMO perspective, and going through some of the challenges in terms of implementing that. And then the final one, which we piloted next week, but we've already kind of got a demand, so we'll put another one on in November, is the real basics of setting up a PMO. So it goes through talking to your stakeholders, actually how do you design a project delivery framework that fits for your organisation. Yes, much of us would like to take kind of the Prince 2 manual and say, we'll just do that. But the reality is that's not going to fit. So how do we and what do we kind of tailor to actually kind of make that work? So the setting up a PMO is a 2-day really kind of practical session working with individuals about how they can do it for their organisation. So some kind of great discussions and some differences. And coming in 2020, who thought I remember when I was at school, I thought I would be 34 in the year 2000. Oh, isn't that ancient? And we're now looking at 2020, and I'm going to be 54 there, so I'm not bothered. Yes, so some of the things that we also recognise is this PMO leadership. Once we're starting to get into PMO director land, where we've got actually more than one PMO across the organisation, we've actually got a much more kind of leadership role to play in the organisation and across the PMOs. So we're developing our PMO leadership course. The enterprise portfolio management will be coming on, and Holger's sitting in the corner. So if anybody's interested, Holger can tell you a little bit more detail. That's coming on in the new year. And we're also working with Martin to start looking at, well, how can we start upskilling the PMO with some of these kind of technical skills to start playing with, particularly RPA, which is probably one of the easiest ones to kind of start playing with in your organisation. And we're also to do learning. Yes, that failed it.
Sorry, when you say technical skill, is it the core? What?
So this is about looking at how we can use AI and machine learning in our organisation. So we recognise that actually you're going to need some real technical bods, yes, and we're never going to get into that remit of doing the deeply technical training, but from a PMO perspective, about upping our technical knowledge about how to decide on how to use those aspects in our organisations and what skills we need so we can engage with the technical individuals to make the most use of that.
For example?
So things like we did at the flash mob last night, robotic process automation, and showed how a simple process could be developed, and that kind of thing. We can show how to automate doing your project reporting from non-PPM tools is a class that we can kind of deliver. Yeah.
Like things like Power BI.
Yes. Yes, but when we'll not necessarily give the Power BI training, it's more a case of an awareness and a knowledge, because before you go on the Power BI training course, you really want to know what you're going to use it for and how you're going to use it. So it's really about upping people's awareness and education around the subject. In the same way, we don't teach people how to become an agile project manager. We don't teach an agile course. What we do is we deliver courses that share with the PMO people, this is what you need to know about agile. Yes, this is how you decide what's useful for your organisation. So it allows you to do then the planning, and you may need to do a formal agile course, but we're about doing the education around kind of the broader piece, because we don't believe it's out there from a PMO specific perspective.
Sorry, do you know at which point in 2020 the technical skills is coming? Or is that still being worked through?
No. So, but in the next couple of months, we'll have that planning in place to say when they're going to come through. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot. Yeah, you know the agile peer, like agility in the PMO.
Yes.
Yeah. Does it mean like lesser of this documentation because of the tools? You know, like mostly now we use a collaborative tool.
Yes, in the Lean Agile PMO, it talks about the changes to kind of the artifacts that we have. And it also talks about the challenge of having to do that lovely phrase bimodal, where we've got a bit of Agile stuff and we've got a bit of waterfall stuff. So it kind of covers that aspect as well. And I'm sorry, I can't bear this. There we go, we can have learning now. correct the spelling mistake. So we're going to be doing quite a bit of investment in e-learning and blended learning over the next few months. So hopefully next year we'll have a suite of things that we can kind of do properly online. And it is worth adding is that we are here, and we're not going to pretend we're not a commercial organisation, because we absolutely are. But we do this because we recognise there is a need for things across the across the PMO industry. Can you just give us another 5 minutes? Is that okay? Thanks. There's things that are needed. So if you believe there's some education and training needed in a particular area, tell us, and we'll look at kind of trying to create something that is of use for you. So much for talking for 25, 30 minutes. Sorry. Any questions? We'll be around for a few minutes yet. And if you do want to join us, feel free to look at any of our 3 websites and turn up at any of our events.